Hello there. My name is Connor Gardner, and this is again just a video walkthrough to showcase one of the personal projects that I made that is MySQL based and that goes through a case study based upon sleep. Now, sleep is something that unfortunately at different stages of our life we may get varying degrees of it. And something that is quite interesting to me is that based off of a case study that was conducted by the National Sleep Foundation in 2011, on average, for someone that is 78 years of age, we will spend about 26 years of living sleeping. That is, of course, if we're getting 7 to 8 hours of sleep per night. And unfortunately, demographically, most people within the United States, for example, probably only average 5 to 6 hours of sleep, 4 to 5 hours of sleep, or less than that. So again, that target threshold has probably been disrupted to an extent here in 2025. But this data set was provided by a couple of different collaborators on Kaggle. A link is provided here. In order for it to be GDPR compliant, a lot of the user information was excluded. So keep that in mind as you're going through it within this video walkthrough, or of course after the fact. There were a couple of different questions that I wanted to identify within using this database, of course, configured again within MySQL, and trying to understand how sleep affects us, and maybe perhaps even different health metrics that affect the quality of our sleep, and how we can, of course, proactively choose to improve the quality of sleep that we may be, of course, getting based upon personal decisions. And that was something that I wanted to generally explore based off of the data that was collected within the data set. And that is, of course, included here, as well as some different issues that I experienced while using MySQL. The workbench specifically is shown here. I have the 4 different tables that were included within my ERD or schema, which, of course, relationship-wise, I wanted to compile my ERD in a simplified manner, and these are one-to-many relationships. As seen here, we also have our primary keys for each of the tables. There is one foreign key, and as seen here in blue, we have not null assignments, which basically essentially means that these are columns that have to have data assigned or inputted into them in order for them to be valid entries. The rest of these were not assigned because there were some various gaps within the data set itself. And environmentally, again, of course, as previously mentioned, I did use MySQL, the workbench, to both create my ERD and my script that was later used within SQL. These are also a couple of useful websites that helped me with my research. And last but not least, there are always things that can be improved when working on a project such as this. One of those that I would like to address, or I'll address all 3 of these in a sequential manner. The first one being that I was experiencing a weird inline error related to not being able to locally upload CSV files to MySQL. I've used MySQL multiple times in the past, specifically for personal projects, and this could just be related to how I've installed this on a new machine, but something that, of course, I want to address in the future. Another thing, though, that I want to add to this project is a dashboard, specifically using something that is web-based like Streamlit, where there's a lot of different accessibility options and customizability built into that interface that could help me visualize the data and showcase just how important creating a viable database is. And specifically being able to query that data effectively and efficiently to showcase kind of the story that it tells. And last but not least, there's not a whole lot of entries in this data set, relatively few to represent a demographic as large as, well, a sleep study. And there are at best 300 entries within this data set. So that is something that I would like to add in the future, if possible, is more user data. That being said, though, we're going to jump into MySQL Workbench and showcase how my personal project works, some of the questions that I had that were answered within this, and then we'll wrap it up. This is, of course, the MySQL Workbench. As seen before you is my ERD, which of course has 4 different tables, as previously mentioned, with the identifying relationships in all cases being one too many. Moving on, though, we have my SQL script. And as seen here at the top, I've instantiated a couple of different usage case statements that allow us to create the database. And of course, if I'm running again, to ensure that we're not overwriting any data. So to start, we're using, of course, the health metrics database by name. This is my schema and database that is in use. We're using it, and as previously mentioned, within the README file, there were, of course, some errors with the local end file not perhaps being instantiated correctly or set up within my environment. Again, I'm still exploring options that could be related to this, but it's here and shown here that it is in fact on, so it should be working. But again, I'm not sure what could be contributing to this error that I experienced. We have a couple of different statements to drop tables. If they already don't, of course, exist, we create our tables. And then due to the in-file error, I had to use manual insertions for all of the different entries from the CSV file, which of course was a very time-consuming process, but it allowed us to get to the point where we could showcase the data and what it represents within this database. One of the critical aspects of maintaining a database, one, relies upon the integrity of the data itself, and 2, the ability to query and use the database for the intent of showcasing the data that's there and what it represents and how it can be used to elevate our understanding of what is the data actually trying to tell us, what does it mean. And so I wrote a couple of different questions to help me try to identify that with the understanding of the relationships between sleep and general health metrics that were identified between users and participants within the self-study. So with that being said, we'll jump into the first question. The first question was, what are general health metrics that influence or could contribute to sleep altercations? I wanted to understand if there was any outliers, and if there were, what those were in relation to sleep itself. Now, as we see within the select statement, we have our sleep disorders, sleep duration, sleep quality, stress level, activity minutes, our blood pressure systolic, our blood pressure diastolic, our heart rate, and daily steps. And so within this case statement, I'm going to run it and I'll showcase kind of what we're seeing here. We're seeing different levels of our sleep duration, and as measured in hours, sleep quality measured from 1 to 10, our stress levels measured from 1 to 10. Activity is measured within minutes. We have our blood pressure, and we have our heart rate, and then we have our daily steps. And within this doesn't account for all of our users. There were some users that were excluded within our queried statement. But with that being said, there isn't enough data to derive correlations between specific persons that would be at risk, just in terms of So you might be wondering, why is this important? What is this actually trying to tell us? Well, the importance of gathering or retaining this information is that we're able to see some of the different trends, if you will, between how someone's sleep might be affected, specifically within those that are getting lower amounts of sleep, and that might be reporting sleep quality being in duress, as well as their stress levels being elevated. And while there isn't a conclusive answer from this question, I want to further explore this with some of the other questions from this data set. Another question that I had that relates to this data set was this: what occupation, as recorded, contributes to the worst sleep quality? And are there any correlated metrics like step count, exercise, or other methods that could contribute to this? Is there an occupation that represents diversity in reported sleep disorders, or are they uniformly represented without any linear relationships? I wanted to get to the core and to see truly if there are any specific occupations that perhaps due to stress or due to lifestyle changes contribute to people generally not sleeping as well as they would like to. Interestingly enough, this is kind of the conclusive answer that I came to, based off of course, the data that is represented from this database. So, nurses, will they have the most stress out of those within this data set? And some of the worst average sleep too. So while nurses may have the most steps per day, they also have the most stress in terms of levels being reported at 7.56 out of 10. And some of the worst average sleep duration too is 6.22 hours. With that being said though, sleep duration quality is best among professions like accountants, engineers, lawyers, and teachers. And it made me wonder, is this related to something that we're not identifying here within perhaps sleep hygiene? Like, for example, when people refrain from using their phones at night or being in front of a screen, like blue light has a severe effect on the overall sleep quality of individuals, as well as alcohol consumption or dietary intakes related to carbohydrates, fats, protein. These were things that on a micro level were never observed. And there could be other underlying factors like caffeine usage as well that could be affecting within not only the occupation itself and some of the daily stressors that someone would, of course, experience, but there could be other relationships such as family, social, or economic backgrounds that are just not able to be expressed within the contents of this database. So with that being said, there are still some open areas or things that, again, inhibit our ability to make a conclusive statement about this question that I had, but this does provide some generality in respects to different occupations and some of the ways in which someone could experience inhibited sleep. But one of the most important things as represented within this database that should not be overlooked is that we don't have enough individuals as represented for each of these professions. As for example, we only have one manager, at least as self-identified occupationally. We don't know if this was a retail or software or an administrative manager. We also only have 2 sales representatives and at best only 4 scientists. And software engineers aside, only 4 were represented within this data set. So again, this is not a conclusive statement, but it is conclusive in at least representing the data set that was identified. And one of the last questions that I had that I just wanted to briefly go over within this walkthrough video is, what is the relationship between sleep duration and health metrics such as body mass index, health or exercise frequency, and sleep disorders? And ultimately, this resides upon the fact that if you are, of course, taking care of yourself in terms of getting time outside or exercising in terms of activity minutes, generally speaking, your sleep duration will be higher. And even if you are within a at-risk category in terms of your BMI or the disorder itself, you are going to have a better quality of life if you are taking the time each day to get at least 60 minutes of exercise. That's a baseline threshold though, and it will vary person to person, but is generally identified within this data set. If you are getting more exercise and taking better care of yourself, you will in fact more than likely get better sleep, and you will avoid the discrepancies of being isolated between 2 different categories of sleep disorders and body mass indexes that ultimately could restrict the way that you live and the way that you are able to live your life and the quality of life that you're able to enjoy. So, taking that with a grain of salt and with hopefully the intuition and ability to take better care of the life that you want to live, I hope that this insight provides context to why sleep is so important and why we can't discredit ourselves from taking the opportunity each day to make better steps towards building better sleep hygiene. I hope that this video was insightful and impactful in being able to identify some areas in which you could improve your sleep, as well as why sleep itself is so important. Thank you.